The night I walked into that gallery in Montreal, I told myself I was just there for the free wine. It was one of those charity gala events that gets advertised in the Gazette, with a photo of some important-looking people in tuxedos and a headline about supporting local arts. My colleague Danielle had been given 2 tickets through her firm and couldn't go. Her youngest had a fever. The timing was terrible. Would I take them off her hands? I said yes because I hadn't done anything interesting in 3 weeks and my cat, Figaro, was starting to give me that look. The one that says you are too boring to own a cat. So I went. Black dress I'd bought for my cousin's wedding 2 years ago. The gold earrings I only wear when I'm trying to convince myself I've got things together. I took the metro to McGill Station and walked the rest of the way in heels I immediately regretted. The gallery was one of those converted heritage buildings on Sherbrooke. High ceilings, exposed stone, the kind of place that makes everything look intentional. Someone had strung soft, warm lighting across the upper beams, and the art on the walls was abstract enough that nobody had to pretend to understand it. The wine was, as promised, free. I did what I always do at events where I don't know anyone. I found a corner with a decent sightline, picked up a glass of Bordeaux that cost more than my electricity bill, and watched people. That's when I noticed him. Not because he was the most striking person in the room, though he was, in a way that I'd only admit to myself much later, when I had less pride about it. I noticed him because he was the only person there, who also appeared to be watching everyone else. He was standing near the back wall, beside a large canvas of deep reds and blacks, and he had that quality some people have, where they seem completely still in a crowded room, like the noise just doesn't reach them. He caught me looking. I looked away. I refilled my wine. I did not look back, except I did once, maybe 20 minutes later, and he was still there. And this time he was looking directly at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not quite amusement, not quite something else. He lifted his glass, just slightly. A small, unhurried acknowledgement. I told myself I was not interested. I had a report due on Monday, and a cat at home, who depended on me, and I was not the kind of person who got swept up in things at charity galas, with men who looked like that. He crossed the room anyway. "You've been auditing the room for the last half hour," he said. His voice was low, unhurried. Slight accent I couldn't immediately place. Something European underneath the Canadian flat vowels. "What's your verdict?" "The Merlot near the east table is better than the one by the entrance," I said. "The abstract with the yellow stripe is the only piece in here that actually does something. And whoever planned the catering should have ordered more of the Brie Crostini, because they ran out 20 minutes ago, and people are still circling." He looked at me for a moment, then he smiled. Not the polished social smile I'd seen him give 3 other people that evening. Something more genuine, smaller. "I'm Stellan," he said. "Noelle," I said. We talked for 2 hours. About the art, then about the city, then about nothing in particular in the way that sometimes happens when the conversation finds its own current. He asked questions like he was actually curious about the answers, which was rarer than it should be. I found out he was in Montreal for work. He was vague about what kind, and that he'd grown up partly in Stockholm, partly in Toronto. He had strong opinions about poutine. It required proper cheese curds, or it was a different dish entirely. And he'd read the same obscure Icelandic novel I'd picked up at a used bookshop on Saint Denis the previous summer. I did not think about Monday's report even once. When the event started winding down, there was a moment, the particular kind of moment where a decision gets made without quite being spoken, and he said, "There's a place nearby. Good bourbon selection, quiet enough to actually hear yourself think, if you're not rushing home." I thought about Figaro. Figaro would be fine. "Sure," I said. I remembered the bar. A polished wood counter, low amber lighting, jazz playing at a volume that suggested rather than insisted. I remembered the bourbon. I remembered laughing at something he said. Genuinely laughing, the kind that surprises you. I remembered he had a tattoo on his left wrist, something geometric, that I'd noticed when he'd reached across the bar for a napkin. And then I remembered nothing else. The next thing I knew, it was morning. Pale winter light was coming through curtains that were not my curtains. The ceiling above me was higher than my ceiling, and the sheets I was lying in were a shade of deep charcoal that I had definitely not chosen. I was wearing a silk slip that was not mine, soft and cream-colored and clearly expensive, and for 3 full seconds I lay completely still, running an inventory of my own body the way you do when you need to know something before you're ready to know it. I was fine. I was clothed. I was unharmed. I was in someone else's bed, in someone else's room, with absolutely no memory of how I'd gotten there, and Figaro was home alone and had presumably knocked something off a shelf in protest. I sat up slowly. The room was large in the particular way that suggested this was not a hotel. Someone lived here. The furniture was minimal but deliberate, the kind of pieces that didn't call attention to themselves, but that you instinctively knew were not from IKEA. A single orchid on the nightstand. A coat hanging on a stand near the door that I was fairly sure was cashmere. My dress was folded neatly on the chair by the window. My shoes were beside it. My bag was on the floor next to the shoes. I stared at all of that for a moment. The neatness of it struck me as somehow more unsettling than anything else. I was reaching for my bag to check my phone when the door opened. Stellan walked in carrying 2 mugs of coffee and wearing a very clean white shirt that was only half buttoned, which I noted in the objective, detached way that one notes facts during a mild crisis. He stopped when he saw me sitting up. "Good morning," he said, completely calm, like this was a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. "What happened?" I said. Not a question, more of an inventory request. "You had a reaction to something. The bartender thinks it may have been a combination. The wine at the event, then the bourbon. You weren't able to walk well. I didn't think it was a good idea to put you in a cab alone. So you brought me here." "Yes." I looked at the slip. "This isn't my clothes." "No. You were uncomfortable. You asked me to find you something else to sleep in." A pause. "You were quite specific about not wanting to sleep in the dress." I had no memory of this. I made a note of that, the blankness, the specific texture of it, and filed it beside several other questions I intended to ask shortly. "My cat," I said. He blinked. It was the first time I'd seen him look the slightest bit unprepared. "Figaro," I said. "My cat. He's been alone all night. I can call someone to check on him. If you give me an address, I'll call someone myself," I said, pulling out my phone. 43% battery, 3 texts from Danielle, how was it? Did anything happen? And 1 voicemail from my mother, which I would deal with in approximately never. I texted my neighbor, Ruth Ann, who had a spare key and a very tolerant attitude toward emergency cat-sitting requests. Then I looked up at Stellan, who had set both mugs of coffee on the nightstand and was leaning against the dresser watching me with an expression I still couldn't entirely decipher. "I need to ask you something," I said. "And I need you to answer me honestly. All right. Did anything happen last night? Between us?" He held my gaze. "No, you're sure, I'm sure. You fell asleep in the car, I carried you up. You woke up briefly, changed, and went back to sleep." He paused. "I slept on the couch, if it matters." It did matter. I wasn't going to say that out loud. "Okay," I said. I reached for the nearer mug of coffee. I needed to be holding something. "Thank you for making sure I got home. Got somewhere." I gestured vaguely at the room. "You're welcome." He said it simply, no performance in it, and that somehow made it worse to be sitting here feeling like I'd lost a page out of my own story. I picked up my dress and he turned away, without being asked, which I noticed. And I changed back into my own clothes and tried to smooth my hair with my fingers in the way that convinced nobody of anything. "I'm going to go," I said. "I know." He turned back around. He was looking at me with the same quality of attention he'd had the night before, but something underneath it had shifted slightly, though I couldn't have said how. "Can I give you my number? In case." A brief pause. "In case you need to reach me about last night. If you have questions later, or if something's wrong." I thought about saying no. I thought about being sensible. "Fine," I said. He wrote it on a piece of paper. Actual paper, with a pen, which I only mention because nobody does that anymore. I tucked it into my bag without looking at it. I took the metro home. I fed Figaro, who expressed his displeasure with the kind of thorough and professional disdain that only cats can achieve. I showered and changed and sat on my couch and told myself that was that. 3 days later, my doctor told me the blood work had come back flagged. Not alcohol. Something else. She was careful and methodical about it, which I appreciated and dreaded simultaneously. "A sedative compound," she said. "Low levels. Could be an interaction. Could be something else." She said I should report it. I sat in her office on the paper-covered examination table and stared at the diplomas on the wall and thought about the particular way The bourbon had tasted near the end of the glass, slightly different from the beginning, a sweetness I'd attributed to the finish. I pulled out my phone. I found the number I'd saved under the very unsentimental label Stellan, Gala, and I called it. He picked up on the second ring. "Someone put something in my drink," I said. "The doctor confirmed it, and I don't remember anything from that bar, which means it happened there, which means it happened when you were with me, which means you either saw something or you did something, and I need to know which one." Silence. Long enough that I started doing what I always do when I'm frightened, which is get very, very quiet. "Can you come to the address I'm going to give you?" he said. "I'll explain everything." "Not on the phone." "Explain what, exactly?" Another pause. "There are things about last night you don't know. Things I should have told you before. If you'll come, I'll tell you all of them." I probably should have called the police. I was aware of that. But I was also aware that I'd already given my statement to a constable at my local station the previous morning, and that the report had been filed and noted, and I'd been told someone would follow up, and I'd felt the very specific futility of a system, doing its best with very little. What I wanted was answers, and the man on the other end of the phone seemed to be the only person who had them. "Send me the address," I said. He did. It was Westmount. Of course it was. I took a cab this time. The building was the kind of Westmount Victorian that looks like it should be on a heritage plaque, except it had been renovated so tastefully that it sat quietly rather than announcing itself. A townhouse, 4 stories, iron fence, the single orchid I recognized on the ground floor windowsill like a flag I hadn't known to look for. He opened the door before I knocked. "I didn't drug you," he said. He said it in the same straightforward tone he used for everything, no escalation in it. "But I know who did." I stepped inside. He told me in the kitchen, which was the right place for it. Neutral, functional, not designed to impress anyone. He made more coffee, and I stood on the other side of the island and listened. His name was not Stellan. That is, it's what he went by, what his mother had called him, what was on his Canadian passport. But the network of people who knew the other version of him used a different name entirely, and those people were not people you wanted to know about you. He had come to Montreal to attend that gala because one of the other guests was a man named Carver Holm, a logistics contractor officially, a money mover unofficially, who was currently in the process of transferring a significant sum through a series of shell companies, and Stellan's job was to confirm Carver's current contacts before that money reached its destination. He did not work for a company. He worked for an arrangement, the kind that certain governments and certain private interests fund and then never acknowledge. He had been watching Carver. Carver had been watching me. "Why me?" I said. My voice came out very even. I was proud of that. "You work for Levesque & Associates," he said. I did. I was an associate financial analyst. We did M&A compliance. "One of your current clients," he said carefully, "is a company called Beaumont Meridian." "I can't discuss clients. I know. I'm not asking you to. I'm telling you that the people Carver Holm works for have been trying to get a look at Beaumont Meridian's due diligence files for 4 months. And your firm has them." He set down his mug. "You were targeted, not randomly. They wanted access to your building ID and your laptop credentials. That's why you were dosed. They needed your bag." I thought about my bag, on the floor beside the chair. Neat. Undisturbed. "My bag was in your room," I said. "Yes. Because I noticed what Carver's contact was doing when they slipped something into your drink. I got you out before they could take anything. Your bag went with us." He paused. "I should have explained all of this that morning. I wasn't sure how much was safe for you to know. And now they know I interfered. Which means they know I was there. Which means Carver knows who I am. Which means my timeline on this entire operation has collapsed." He looked at me steadily. "And they may come back to you. Which is why you need to know." I stood there in his kitchen in my sensible work coat and my regrettable heels, and I thought about all the ways this was completely insane. "What were you going to do?" I said slowly. "If none of this had happened, that night, if it had just been a nice evening, what were you going to do at the end of it?" Something moved across his face. "Ask for your number," he said. "Properly." I looked at him for a long moment. "I have to call my firm," I said. "Our compliance officer. This is a security incident, and I don't have a choice." "I know." And then I'm going to have to tell you everything I can legally tell you about the timeline of those files, so you can figure out if anyone else has already gotten to them. I know, he said again. And then, I said, I'm going to need you to explain what happens next. All of it, without deciding for me what I can handle knowing. He nodded once, quietly. Okay, he said. Sit down, I'll start from the beginning. I sat down. Figaro's morning message had come back from Ruth Ann. He's fine. Ate his breakfast. Knocked a mug off the counter for reasons known only to him, and I set my phone face up on the island so I could see it. And I thought about how 3 days ago, I'd walked into a gallery looking for free wine and an interesting evening. I'd gotten something else entirely. But here's the thing I kept coming back to, in the weeks that followed, and there were weeks, and they were complicated, involving my firm's security team and Stellan's handlers, and one very tense meeting in a government building on Wellington Street that I was never to discuss. I hadn't been helpless that night. I'd been drugged, yes. Something had been taken from me. My clarity, my agencies, those hours I'd never recover. That part was real and it mattered. And I'd had to sit with it carefully, with my doctor, with the constable who'd followed up, after all, with myself. But I'd also been the one who called. I'd been the one who showed up. I'd been the one who sat across from a man with a very complicated life and said, tell me everything, and don't decide for me what I can handle. That's the version I chose to keep. Figaro was less forgiving. He regarded Stellan with deep suspicion for approximately 2 months before abruptly changing his position and deciding that Stellan's lap was acceptable during the evening news, which in Figaro's value system was roughly equivalent to a formal endorsement. The orchid, it turned out, was Stellan's mother's habit. She'd sent one to every place he'd lived for 12 years, so she always knew which window to look for. I thought that was the saddest and most loving thing I'd ever heard. I told him so, one evening in the kitchen that had stopped feeling like a neutral space and started feeling like somewhere I was allowed to be. He looked at me in that way he had. That particular quality of attention I'd first noticed across a crowded room on a night when I'd only gone for the free wine. And he said, she'll want to send you one too, you know, once she knows about you. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, she'd better clear it with Figaro first. He smiled. The real one, the small one. I think that was when I stopped pretending I wasn't in this.